Hello, my friends. Lori Ashcraft here. I'm your host for Viva Evolution, which is part of Recovery and Resilience Solutions, a training and consulting branch of Crestwood Behavioral Health. So welcome. Today, we have not one guest, but three. And you might remember Matt Federici. He was with us a few months ago, so he's back with us. And his wonderful brother Raymond is here, who will talk a lot about his own personal evolution. And then one of my very favorite people, Gina Calhoun. If you haven't met Gina before, then you're in for a wonderful surprise because she is a delightful person. And you'll see. I don't have to keep going on. Okay, so if you will subscribe, that will help us out a lot. I think there's a little button someplace, probably red, maybe over to the side. Just press that. That will help us. So, I want to go over the learning objectives with you. The reason I do this is because some of you are able to get continuing ed credits for watching these podcasts and taking a very simple test at the end. And yeah, easy way to get a credit. Okay, here's the learning objectives. So we're first going to explore the difference between role-based interventions and soul-based interventions. Pardon the word intervention. It's the best thing I could come up with at the moment. But treatment, services, whatever you want to call it. So do we come to our work by the role we identify with, or do we bring our soul to it? And as we know, if the soul doesn't come, it's not near as effective. So that's our first objective, to really look at that. Next, we're going to look at the core domains of community participation, because we know that community is a huge part of recovery. So we'll go over that. Then we're going to look at stigma. And sometimes when we think of stigma, we think of it externally, like what happens in our environment. So we're going to look at that a little bit, but we're also going to look at internalized stigma, what we carry around with us that's at least as damaging as what happens on the outside. Then we're going to look at how the needs of people in recovery are evolving. Like when we first started providing recovery services 25 years ago, people had specific needs. Recovery was brand new. If you said recovery, people thought you were talking about substance things, because we didn't use that word in mental health circles, simply because the prevailing thought was that you don't recover from mental illness. Well, of course, we know that's different now. I myself am evidence of that, as are many of you. So we know that happens, but how have our needs changed over time? We aren't the same people we were 20 years ago. And the people that we're serving now for the first time are in a different space than the folks we serve. So how are things evolving there? That's number 4. Number 5 is, how do we create? This is a how-to one. How do we create creative, inclusive, everyday healing spaces in our communities? So there's 5 amazing things we're going to cover today. I think we're going to have a good time. Glad you're with us. So get comfortable and get ready to listen to these amazing people. You're going to love it. Okay, here we go. Matt, Ray, and Gina. I just want to thank the 3 of you so much for being willing to share your wisdom with our viewers. I've known all of you for a very long time. I've learned a lot from you guys, and I'm just delighted to be able to share you. So thank you for being willing to do this. So we have Gina Calhoun. Wonder Woman is how I like to think of Gina. And you'll find out why. We have Raymond, who's an amazing guy with an amazing story. And his brother is Matt Federici. We've heard from Matt once before. So we've got 3 wonderful beings here.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, I'm in a women's group. We meet on Sundays. and we try to ask questions that inspire us. And one of the questions that came up this last Sunday is, are you a soul or are you a role? And it really helped me think through. I think early in my career, before I was willing to admit that I was a peer and had a significant mental health issue, I think I was in a role. And when I tried to step out of my role, it upset people. They wanted to keep me in my role. But when I became more defined with my soul than my role, I think my work got a lot better. And the turning point, I was having the courage to talk about my mental health issues. And that helped me become more authentic and more real, and to share from the point of view of my soul, not my role. So I know you guys are all soul people. So I'm going to ask you questions that kind of get to that soul point. So I'm just going to start, and you guys tell me if I'm not doing it quite right. So Gina, let's start with you. How do you want to talk about moving? Maybe you were never in a role, or maybe you were. How did you move from being in a role to a soul?
Wow. So, Lori, if you could give me just a moment, because in my brain, here's what's happening. I'm trying to define role for myself, and I'm trying to define soul for myself. So, if you could move to maybe Ray or Matthew, let them answer and let me work out how I'm defining each of those, that would be helpful.
Okay. And let me just say, if you want to talk about something else, that's fine too. I might not have asked the right question.
I absolutely love the question. It is a question that is open enough for me to explore the meaning of those roles or those words in my own mind, and also be able to answer in a way that's going to work for me and hopefully your viewers.
Okay. All right. Well, Matt or Ray, which one? Just a second.
Well,
yes, I am. Sorry.
well, Matt, if you don't mind, I kind of want to take the opportunity when I feel I'm ready, right? So I um so I shared this with Gina the other day when we were talking about how the fact that we are both graduates of our the of the state institutions of Norristown State and Harrisburg State.
Aha.
Yes. And
Well, congratulations on escaping.
and yes, and the unique thing about that too recently is I discovered that we both in both issue experiences for us, the basically the history has been wiped. They basically closed the institution, so to
Woo!
speak, and so the buildings are gone.
Oh,
So the physical history that might have occurred isn't there anymore in a way. So that's kind of sad for me. But and so I carried the role for a long time as someone with lived experience.
is it the role of a mental patient? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, I didn't want to. Yes, if you want to put it that way. Yes. And and just like all my other peers, we were all trying to fit in and find what our diagnosis was, kind of like the why to where we work. And as I'm looking back, I realized that that certainly was a step, but I didn't really grow until I moved on from that role.
Mhm.
Um, and moving on was for me redefining who I wanted to be.
Mhm.
Um, and I took my lead from a very important Revolutionary War person hero called Thomas Paine, who wrote Common Sense.
Mhm.
And yes, he was my inspiration
Mhm.
for. I realized as an advocate, the best way to reach out to people was through the printed press. So I started a newsletter that I shared and was actually getting pretty good with it to the point where I actually got my first job opportunity because the person was like, "Well, listen, can we hire you to do our newsletter?" I'm like,
Mhm.
"Okay, that's good, cool." So, but
Cleverly
that in
named,
this,
cleverly named the inner voice, by the way.
yes,
Oh, good.
yes, cleverly, I figured, you know, um, and that gave me uh, the bridge between my past role, and what I had wanted to do. And I was able to successfully navigate that as a consumer advocate.
Right. I
And
can, Raymond, if I could,
yes,
truth in advertising being your brother and kind of being to the storyline here, I think what's interesting is that, that is definitely your soul in motion, right? Like that aspect of who you are. Always one of your strengths was always really well read and to some degree struggling to express what you had been going through writing. And pulling that all together. But I think to Lori's point about roles is, maybe talk like I would invite you to share a little bit about what happened when you shifted out of being the mental patient role and taking on this role of advocate educator, peer educator at a time where like there were no peer specialists. There were
Yeah.
no, this is not a time where recovery was even talked about very much.
Yeah.
And I think you experienced a little pushback from people that were like, no, stay in your consumer mental patient
Yes.
role.
Yes.
I I remember my original idea was just to help out the program I was attending with a newsletter that a previous peer had started. And I shared my first article, and the therapist was like, "You can't write that. People will get
Hmm.
upset."
Hmm.
And I was like, okay. But I'm getting this I'm basically reprinting the article from a national newsletter from somewhere else.
Mhm.
Because I felt, having attended that program, everybody was looking for information, but they were limited to getting it from the therapist only,
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
kind of thing. So I was like, oh, okay. Well, that's when I decided I could do it better on my own without having the repercussions. So um, I have actually a copy of the newsletter. So I ended up writing an editorial policy statement in the back, basically stating the content of the newsletter is not the county.
Raymond, let me ask you a question. Uh,
Yes.
I always attach an article to the podcast, so people
Hmm.
have some. Why don't you send me something to use as an article with the podcast?
Okay. All
Yeah.
right. That'd be good.
Okay, let's move on to Matt and see what he has to say here.
Thanks, Lori. And yeah, I realized actually, although I'm much, much younger than Raymond, and you can see it, if this is a podcast, our voices are a lot similar. So, yeah, this
Yes.
is Matthew talking here. So, yeah, I think it's an interesting question, and I know I know in the journeys of doing this work with lots of people, the word soul can being a realm that is not a domain other people consider. But I heard this thing recently about our instead of seeing our souls inside our body, seeing that our bodies are in our soul, right? And I like that idea because it's this collective energy and it's who we are holistically. Um, and yeah, I think it's an interesting question because I think, and I want to credit BJ North, who has worked with us here at Copeland Center Doors to Wellbeing as we are a community with really the discussion, which has kind of turned into a big portion of our taking action curriculum, and that is that we have to work from the inside out, not the outside in.
I love
And
that.
yeah, and you know, she talks about that. And we create some frameworks so that we can really get to our inside out stories because there's so much outside in our lives that you know we grow up and we have to look to the outside to kind of start giving us some information, and then a lot of harm can happen there, right? Where you know whether it's gender roles, whether it's you know identities formulated around diagnoses and these things that can really lock us into you know what we believe about ourselves. You know, they say, well, if you believe you can or you can't, you're probably right. You know, and it's like what you believe about yourself. I feel like I was very fortunate to have the skills and the resources um, when I was going through my journey to not get too stuck in those roles. And I think for Raymond and I both, I mean, we had parental support that, you know, I remember my mother pushing back against messages she was receiving from other family member organizations that were really like try to accept that, you know, when Raymond was in a state institution and things kind of were tough, it was like, you have to readjust your expectations for him. And I remember her being like, yeah, I don't care what's going on here. My children will be productive members of society, right?
Yeah.
And I think that that support of like we belong in the community like everyone else, and we'll figure out how around those things. And I think having the opportunity and the support to participate in our community like everyone else, you know, afforded us the ability to find ourselves outside of the prescribed roles that we had. And, you know, for me, you know, a big part of that was, you know, I was also really supported to continue to access my education while in an institution in high school that I saw that other people were assigned to a role where they were never going to see the light of a normal integrated education system. But I had the support system to advocate. It was like, no, this is just like any other medical leave. Make sure his schoolwork follows him. And that in turn actually was the key to my well-being in the long run, because I realized that that I had a particular way of learning and teaching myself because I got the individual supports in the hospital and I got pulled out of the role of being in group therapy. And I got to catch up with my schoolwork. And then I discovered Edgar Allan Poe and Charles Baudelaire and all this poetry that allowed me to find a new way to express myself and the pain that I was going through. But the journey continues to resist these outside in roles. Like I only recently discovered through building bridges through the mental health and substance use community, like, yeah, actually, because of a series of events that were leading up to a major depression for me, realized that I was hooked on opioids from accidents and nobody knew or thought about it. But like in hindsight, I realized that I was kind of, I was not being guided very well with it. And I had ended up building up a stockpile. And then there were other people at that time that had it. And I recognized on the timeline of things that when the depression really went to the extreme level, it was right about the time I was probably withdrawing from opioids. But this is the late 80s, early 90s, and nobody looked at it that way. So for years, I kind of fell into thinking that my story was only that side of the story. And that's an outside in. Like a lot of us have been given these frameworks, even from our own peer community, right? Like within the substance use peer community and the mental health peer community. But really holistically, there is a soul underneath of there that is grappling with both of those elements. And it's really the outside in roles we are assigned, whether substance use recovery or mental health. But as I wanted to enter into the role of a helper, because of my own experience and what I was learning at the kitchen table as Raymond was navigating the state hospitals. And so I went from being on one side to pursuing degrees to work in the field. And I didn't like my role because I was told in my role not to share what I knew from my own personal experience.
Mm-hmm.
I was told stay, don't project, don't, all this stuff. And no one at that time was really talking about the therapeutic use of disclosure and that there is a way to bring your whole self into those healing relationships until the peer support movement came. But I went from many times, it was like I was afforded the privilege sometimes of job opportunities because, I was a provider who was also a family member. So family members advocated for me. And then I got hired and I was seen as the family member by the providers.
Yeah, that was your role.
Yeah, that was my role. And then even amongst my peers, when the peer movement started to emerge and started to show up, I remember one person once at a meeting going, why don't you be quiet and let the peers talk because you're a provider? And I just found these boxes I kept getting put into, right, from these outside in roles. And until I've just grown to the place to realize that everyone's on this spectrum in our communities. And these are arbitrary designations we're giving to people, and then people are signing up for them, and we're not getting. This is why I love that we have evolved to talk about taking action for whole health and well-being, because it's not about some recovery plan. It's about how we take action to get to our wellness and how we define that for ourselves and how it's showing up like today and for real. Having been on this journey with both Raymond and Gina, and then when we've all kind of grown through all these different roles, one of my biggest things is taking action through what we call the doors to community participation, because I know a bit about what showed up for Raymond when he was really participating in the community like everyone else as a father, and going to Gina's wedding, right? How that's where we're able to grow beyond our roles, is when we have access to figure out how we want to participate in the community like everybody else.
Right.
But those institutions
let's get
really
back to community, because that's what you guys are all about. But before we do that, Gina, catch up with us here.
Yes. First of all, I apologize. So one of the valued social roles that I choose to take on is that of a wife. So we have a lot going on in our household, which is why you saw me get up a few times to actually be part of that relationship in the role that I choose to take on. Yeah. So let's get back to your initial question, Lori, if that's okay with you.
Yes. Yeah.
Let me define soul as who I am as a human being, deep inside. Those natural personalities and passions that I have deep inside that just make me unique from every other human being in the world, and sometimes similar to every other human being in the world. So that's how I would define soul. Let me define role as either expectations or something that other people place upon me, or roles I choose to take on to express who I am as a soul. So I don't necessarily see role as a bad thing unless it's assigned by somebody else and it's become ingrained that they're defining who I am as a person. That's where I have this little kind of trigger when it comes to the definition of role. If it's placed upon me and somehow I absorb that as defining who I am, then I got a problem with it. So as part of my story, I want to go to what Raymond said. I don't necessarily see myself as a graduate of a state hospital, and here's why. I think of graduation as something that I've completed, a program that I have completed. And I'm sorry, I did not complete my stay at Harrisburg State Hospital as defined by other people. But I will say that I experienced some physical liberation or freedom by escaping from a state hospital.
You escaped.
I escaped.
I love it.
I made my way to the community, at least physically.
Yeah.
So I think emotionally And mentally, I was still trying to find a place where I could be the soul, who I am as a human being.
Yeah. Yeah.
And still belong, still have a purpose, which would be a role that I could take on to make meaning of my life, but also contribute to the community as a whole.
That's lovely.
So, yeah, so in doing that, I was trying to find self. And our mental health system was on the tipping point of transforming. I know it's a continuous process, but it was on that tipping point where all of a sudden we were hearing that word recovery more and more often.
Mhm.
We were hearing the word resiliency a little bit. At that time, we were hearing community integration, but to me, that can have some overlap with community inclusion.
Yeah.
So for me, it was finding, how do I belong in something I'm passionate about, making a change in a mental health system for my own life, but for the lives of others that may be seeing the role as somebody that is just consuming services.
Yes.
So I wanted to make a difference, and I had an opportunity to share my story. And even though people were very much saying that I was contributing to making a difference, I started to define myself only by one story: the person that escaped from a state hospital. And it had benefits, it had blessings. I'm telling you, it gave me a way to make triumph out of my hardship. That was a benefit.
Yeah.
I feel like it at least gave other people the idea that, hey, if this chick can do it, I can certainly do it myself. And I wanted to make a difference. And I got to hear the stories of other people also on a journey of resiliency, recovery, and wellness. And in hearing those stories, I also learned. And isn't that what peer support is all about? That
Yes.
mutual relationship where both people are learning and traveling on journeys together. And I thought, wow. And this all came from that one story. So I held on to it.
Yeah. Yeah.
But there does come a point in your life where you say, my soul, who I am deep inside, is longing, yes, to still be part of this, but longing to take on other valued social roles. I had hopes, dreams, and goals before I got stuck in the mental health system. I really did.
Yeah.
And I'm like feeling this loss deep inside, saying, I still want to be part of this. But man, I want to find this, and this.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so many different things help me to take on other valued social roles in my community to let who I am deep inside shine.
Yeah.
So deep inside, I grew up as an athlete and I wanted to be a competitor. So at 52, I'm 59 now, might have been 51. I went back and I'm now an adult competitive gymnast. That is a valued social role I chose to take on.
Yeah.
I fell deeply in love with my husband, and I chose marriage as the way we expressed our relationship together. That's a valued social role that expresses my need for relationship, an intimate relationship deep inside. I coach gymnastics and I adore children. I have never been able to have children myself, but man, I like children. You can learn a lot from children, and I get to work with children right now. That's a valued social role that helps me and is making a difference in my community. But I'm also passionate about peer support. I'm also still saying I'm still that chick that escaped from the state hospital. That is a role that was assigned to me, but now I'm choosing to take on as a victory. And deep inside of who I am, that soul is a person that wants to make a difference, that wants to continue to learn and grow. that is passionate and energetic,
Mhm.
that loves movement, that is very planful, that is goal directed, but I can use all these strengths. Lori, you wrote about this, moving from what's wrong to what's strong. You wrote about it. I actually used it in one of my keynotes. I can use all those strengths inside me to say, what valued roles do I choose
Yeah.
to take on to make a difference in my life and in my community? I hope that answered the question.
I'm so glad I asked this question, because you guys have taken it way down the road in a really beautiful direction. So let me ask a companion question. But I'll explain it a little bit. I've come to think that most of our gifts come from our wounds. If we know how to access that wound in a positive way, as opposed to a victim kind of way. So, for example, you could have really strongly identified with being in a state hospital, but you purposely escaped. And I don't know how Raymond got out, but he got out. And that all three of you escaped something. But you're kind of all touching on this. When a gift comes from a wound, I think that's the most powerful gift. It's not something you just read about in the newspaper or you saw somebody have, but it's from that wound that our passion for recovery and for helping other people. So as long as we can stay in touch with the wound, I think it leads us to our soul and out of a role. What would you guys say about that?
Well,
Matthew, you're smiling. Are you ready?
I'll jump it. Sure. Yeah. I mean, I always I always like to have these conversations about, healing and, about healing trauma, and trauma being not an event, but an experience, the experience that we have in the world with adversity. And like this image of a tree that is just leaning a little right, a little left, and the branches are pointing towards the light because it grew through extreme weather and winds. And one of the things is that we grow stronger in some of our broken places, right? And this is physically true too. And so when I think back to, not going to get into the details of the adversity I experienced, but my love of, sometimes we can take a look at those little glimmers of wellness that we have, those little things. And for me, like gardening and music is this tremendously powerful thing for me. And when I look back to some critical moments, I see, oh, they were the wellness tools I clung to in those. They were the wellness tools that helped me through, in that experience. And I think sometimes what could be the detriment for a lot of people is when there's limits on our ability to grab those wellness tools, right? And sometimes in the name of helping, we've kind of pushed people over here, and we have this kind of let's isolate the person from stress. And that's not actually the answer, right? Because in that process, we take away that person's determination to find those things, right? And a big one I will say is romance, sex, and intimacy, is something that documentedly we pull back away from people in the name of, well, you need to get this stuff straight first. One of the most powerful things that I found that gets kind of brought up in the groups is that we don't have to meet somebody else's definition of wellness to participate. We get well through our participating in relationships and being in the community and doing things and stumbling and figuring it out. And I think almost everybody can relate to what you're bringing up here around growing through our wounds and finding through our wounds, in that we all go through messy relationships, intimate relationships, friendships, and the wounds happen there. We bump into each other, and sometimes that carried trauma of beliefs or effects, and trust, etc., show up in those relationships, and then we work it out. It's great to really have the space. And I mean, this is why for me, it's like my practice now is I just need to be as well as possible myself and show up with everybody.
Mhm.
It's not a technique or a strategy I apply onto somebody that's separate from who I am. It's something I do to practice wellness for myself every day, to heal from, to reflect on my experiences. Why do I believe this? And it doesn't support me to be well, and to change my belief systems.
Yeah,
Because
that's
the belief systems, right? The belief systems are often formed out of that adversity and those wounds. And it's not the wound that hurts us, it's what we believed about it. And
yes.
we
Yeah.
carry that along. And a lot of times what we believe about is what somebody told us to believe about it.
Mm.
So yeah, for me, that's what that journey is really about, is like picking that apart, and then, being able, that's why I don't like small talk sometimes. It's like I really want to get to know you. And sometimes people pull back, and then that's a belief system. Like we can't go there, right?
Yeah.
The way to move on is to keep things on the surface with people. And,
Yeah.
for me, it's not.
I want to
Yeah.
speak to that because I think because of the years I spent in depression and anxiety, it was a natural for me to say, let's be strong. Let's focus on what's strong with you, not what's wrong with you. Because part of my survival was to avoid anything that might lead to depression. I just couldn't afford it. I had to stay focused on this. Then I had a couple extremely stressful situations that pretty much took me to my knees. And out of that, I found so much growth in that painful situation that I began to realize, we've got to use it. Let's not waste our pain. Let's have our pain be a stimulus for how to get out of this, or how to move on, how to get out of the role we've fallen into. So maybe we could talk a little bit about that. How do we use pain? You guys have all been masters of using pain as a stimulus to move through things. So did you want to speak to that, Raymond?
Yeah, well, I was going to say that I am also kind of view myself as a graduate of the School of Hard Knocks,
Yes.
and things just, yeah, things happen first, then I learn.
Mhm.
Okay, that's how the if there's an epithet, it would be that. I think, and I'm not sure if this views as wounds or not, but the I the scariest moment of my entire life happened, and it had nothing to do with my being in the state hospital, or any of that. Up to that point had been, but was the moment I held my daughter
Mhm.
in my hand. She was born July 29th, 2004. And I had been in a relationship. It was something new to me that the mental health system was like not very helpful with. Kind of, I had been working full time, and it was something new to me. And then the situation happened, and I just was so uncertain
Mhm.
about what I needed to do. So I did nothing. Of course, that didn't stop anything. And so the moment my daughter was born, uh, I finally made that decision about that, I'm going to have to step up. And this being a new role. So so physically, it felt like I was at the top of the roller coaster looking to go down. And I'm like, okay, all right. So, um, and I had no choice but then to reach out to my family and say, hey, by the way, guess what? You're now an uncle.
Oh,
You know, because I had feared that my past would um, affect this outcome
mhm.
that I kind of felt like I needed to embrace. So, um, and I'm glad I did because it was a different role, a role I enjoyed doing having, um, and I learned a lot um, raising a daughter, and the I finally learned what it was to have unconditional
Mhm.
high regard.
Mhm.
Well, for the kid,
Yeah,
it would be unconditional love.
yeah.
Yes.
But and
And it was
again,
awesome.
having been there, I have to say that given this natural new role, and quite honestly, proud of Raymond for stepping up to that scenario and saying, "I will be a father. I will be there." And I just wanted to say, and we've talked about this, right, Raymond, about this
Right.
notion of assumed constraints.
Hmm.
That sometimes we live a life and we have certain restraints, like that elephant that's just tied to a rope as a cub, and then later believes it can't break free from that. And there was a moment where Raymond stepped up in ways that people always said, well, he would have these limitations, he would have this, and I remember having a conversation going, just think, did you ever think you had been able to do what you're doing now? Um, and you didn't. And it's like, well, just think how many other ways you might be holding yourself back by believing in these
Yeah.
assumed constraints about things. And Raymond's always been fantastic at showing up for other people.
Mhm.
Um, but prior to that, showing up for himself was a different thing. And there's things we do, sometimes self-esteem, et cetera, that keep us from doing the greatness we can do for others for ourselves.
Yeah.
And that was
Right.
definitely a natural role that came about, that just it forced a breaking free from a role assignment that
Yeah.
said, oh, this is how you're going to live and this is what you need to do. And right, so many people, because of the terminology serious, persistent, chronic mental illness,
Mhm.
we're reinforcing that person, oh, it's going to be like this forever. And it's just, first of all, it's not true
Right.
scientifically,
Right.
but sometimes it takes these new natural roles in the community
Mhm.
to really break us free from those constraints.
I
Hmm.
was thinking about all of us here. We've all had those big plunges that we probably didn't choose. Um,
No.
but we can use them to really strengthen our gifts and what we can contribute. So, Raymond, thanks for sharing that part of your story. It's so beautiful. I'm so proud of you.
Thank
It
you.
takes
Thank
so
you.
much courage to do that.
Well, my daughter is now going to hit 21. So it's really hard for me to realize that she's been around for 21 years. Okay. So, um, and she recently took the training to become a certified peer specialist,
Ah,
um, and has followed my footsteps. So she's like the generation
yeah,
peer
great.
supporter.
Yeah,
Um,
wonderful.
yes. And she tells me all the time that that she takes a lot of onus on what I've gone through and
Mhm.
how I supported her.
Yeah.
Um, and so yeah, and she was definitely there for um, you know, I survived open heart surgery in February.
Oh.
And yes, and it's because of her insistence that I actually went to see the doctor, and the doctor took one look at me and told me, "You're going to the hospital."
You know, you men, I don't know what it is about you, but you just refuse to believe that there's anything that can be fixed. And you're just wasting your time, and you don't take pills, and you don't do this until somebody just gets in your face. And I have to do that
Yeah.
with Gene. Otherwise, he wouldn't have a tooth left in his head, for one thing.
Well, I'm taking good care, proactive of my health, and I'm not signing up for that men role either.
Okay, good.
Good. Good.
Gina, let's get back to you. Do you want to speak to some of the things we've been talking about?
I sure. Again, I have to, because I love listening. I learned so much from both you, Lori, Raymond, and Matthew. So let me get back to the original question just for a moment.
Yeah.
So that was, for many people, our wounds can actually play a major, I'm going to use the word role, in our learning and growing.
Yeah.
And so when we interpret moving from what's wrong toward what's strong, we can't deny that there are challenges in life, and those challenges, when remembered, can stimulate growth. Is that the question itself?
Yeah, that's good.
Okay. So I just want to start out by first and foremost saying that I think me, as well as many other people, human beings walking this earth today, are influenced by the relationships and environments around us.
Yeah.
So I do believe that emotionally, that whatever's happening out here and in here is going to challenge us at some point in our life. I would also say that I think that challenges that are wounding can absolutely stimulate growth. I also believe big changes that are blessings can stimulate growth. I'm telling you what, my life changed when I got married, and that was a blessing, but my life changed because all of a sudden, everything within my being, both my soul and my roles, were changing in some form where I had to learn and grow with that change. So I wanted to start out by saying that. For me, though, I think and I'm trying to remember, this could be inaccurate, but it's what's coming to mind right now. I literally had to take the wound and change how I was seeing the wound to be able to move forward. And let me just give you an example. So many times, and I was hospitalized a lot, many times I was seen as obstinate, unable to follow the plan. I was seen as stubborn. And so all of those things I began to internalize inside. For real change from that wound to occur, I first had to redefine what that really meant to me. I was stubborn. No, maybe I was stubborn. I could have been stubborn. I'm kind of stubborn. But I was also determined to make my own choices about how I wanted to move towards wellness. So I had to redefine that stubbornness as negative to say, wait a minute, I just want to be part of defining how I want to move forward in wellness for my own life. So there's a strength in there. I wanted some autonomy. I wanted some self-liberation. So there's some strength in there. I was seen as obstinate. Oh my goodness. I don't know how many times that word came up when people were talking about me. But what I wanted was to be heard. I was maybe a little bit passive aggressive when I wasn't heard in my own life. And people were always telling me what I needed to do. So I had to redefine that inside. I had to go deep in my soul and say, I probably am a little bit obstinate, but maybe that's part of who I am. And why is that? Because I want a voice in my own life. I want to be heard. I want to be seen. Maybe I am stubborn. Maybe I am opinionated. That is probably true. But you know what? Seeing that as challenging and wrong, maybe in some instances, but also seeing that as how can I use that as self-determination to find my own way to be part of the world, even with challenges. So I still have challenges today. There are times I still have great sensitivity to what's around me. And I'm going to say it that way because I do. And it creates great anxiety and fear. And I have to dig down and say, what transferable skills did I learn in the past when things were challenging that I can use today to move forward despite or with the anxiety and fear? And I really dig back to transferable skills. Sometimes I dig back all the way back to, wait a minute, if I can have a plan to escape from a state hospital and live on the streets, I can certainly use that self-determination, that desire for freedom to get through this moment now. I just need to have an action step so that I can move through it with the fear or with the anxiety.
So, thanks for that. That was great. I know the three of you are passionate about community and that you purposefully use community in the work you do with other people. Tell us a little bit about what you do with community. I mean, I know some people don't use it at all, and it's such an amazing process of being in a program or a group of people who are determined to use community as a healing process. How do you guys do that?
Well, if I could share, I think one of the things that has helped me talk about this and see it actually has been the work we've done with Mark Salzer at To You Collaborative, where they, in order to study the importance of community participation, and particularly study how when people go into treatment and services, they've basically be able to see how are people supported to be in the community like everyone else. And they basically found, well, actually, people are deterred from it and decrease their participation. And then there's studies about how that participation has been helpful. But in order to do that objectively, they came up with these domains of community that, regardless of age, ethnicity, race, geography, these domains of, romance, sex and intimacy, education, employment, housing, leisure, recreation, activity, friendship, family, right? And so there are these very solid domains. And I recognize, as I told the story about discovering through education and my access to it, that was transformative for me, and led to next steps and next steps and next steps. And I'm also a parent today, and that's a domain of participation. And so it's not this amorphic definition, well, what's community to you? And it's not just your social relationships, but it's these aspects of being in the world that are natural and objectively definable. And being able to look back at that journey of that pain and those wounds and that healing and the mental health challenges, the emotional, spiritual, and psychological challenges I went through, I realized that framework is it. Like talking about how I figured those things out in the way I uniquely participate in those domains of participation. Rather than, I think, to a certain degree, we made some steps talking about recovery, but it's hugely subjective, like feeling hope. And, like there's only goes so far where you can talk to people about you can get well, you can stay well, and you can do things for yourself when you start feeling this distress. But then when you don't have access to employment and people are telling you don't get in a relationship and don't go back to work yet, or even worse, you're discriminated against in those areas, right? And then some people's, their mental health challenge is related exactly to that people aren't including them or excluding them because they're different and unique. And, rather than changing the round knobs on the door, let's put a handle that makes sense for everybody to come through. So, I think it's important to recognize that we experience these barriers, and sometimes the wound is the barrier to participating like everyone else. And the strength is, talking about how we found a way despite that exclusion to get back, right? Maybe we didn't, we don't talk in the same patterns as everyone else. So it was harder for us to have a social group at school. And over time, that exclusion kind of wore on us. But then we found a way through science fiction books to find friendship, right? Find through that nature rec to get by until we figured that out, right? Until we had a sense of belonging somewhere. So for me, it's having those conversations, and it's staying there too. Like as my life has changed, through the pandemic, right? And having kids, and like I have to constantly figure out how I'm staying well in the community.
Can I add to that though?
Yes.
Because I love what you said, Matthew. I just want to broaden that just a little bit. So I believe that sometimes our own self stigma and how we see ourselves is what holds us back. So I do believe that being included in community is shared responsibility. So we absolutely, Matthew, as you said, it is important for people to have access and opportunity and to feel a welcoming environment. It's also important for me to take the responsibility to get over myself and walk in and join and see myself beyond just a person with mental health challenges. See myself, if I'm going to the gym, I'm an athlete just like everyone else. There's a common basis there, just like peer support. How do I belong as an athlete? If I am looking or joining a church that has a similar belief system or faith that I have, it's belonging to that community because we have something in common, and it's staying there and feeling like I'm part of. I once heard a saying that had a lot of meaning to me, and I'm sorry I don't know who said it, but it says that many of us, including those of us with mental health challenges, but many of us just as human beings, want a place to be, we want a place to belong, and we want a place to become. And I think that means educating communities, but I also think that means me saying who I am in my soul, and where can I actually take the initiative to get out there and find a place where all of who I am can be, belong, and become. So I think it's both. I think there's some mutuality in responsibility when it comes to community inclusion. I also have to be willing to get over myself and my own stigma and go out there and find that welcoming environment.
Yeah. I just so agree that we have to play a major role in our recovery. And no one else can do that for us. I mean, we have to be the one, like Raymond's saying, stepping up. And Matt, you're saying a little bit about this too. Sometimes it's so hard to step up when you don't have supports, because you need someone to believe in you before you can believe in yourself. And it seems like you're kind of on one way or the other relating that to community is believing in each other in a way that gives hope. I know we're out of time. Raymond, do you have any closing thoughts for us?
Well, as I'm currently a certified peer specialist, have been since 2006, actually. And I've been working nonstop, full time for a long time. And my experience has been with supporting my peers. It's been sad, but we used to, I started my journey working at a drop-in center as a peer drop-in center where people can just come in, and it was a safe space to be. Um, and people were allowed to be who they are. whether they're dealing with hearing voices or and what have you, and learning to be living out in the community. And unfortunately, things got moved to the point where, everything's billable and on to the next thing. So those places have disappeared. And I'm currently, as a peer specialist, working with peers. And it's very hard to try to get them connected to the community when the locations, there aren't many safe places to be. Um, the we're limited now to the library and to the local park. Sometimes McDonald's,
Yeah.
because, at least there's a restroom there,
Yes.
and we're allowed to be there and to looter. No, not looter. Yeah, I have no idea what that word. Anyway, and I wish there were more places
Yeah.
out there that didn't have to feel like we have to be judged
Yeah.
in order to
That's where
participate
that
in it.
education comes in.
I think all
You
of
know?
us need to just try to bring those places back however we can.
Yes.
Because
And-
like you're saying, and maybe
I
we
would
can,
I would like to see us start talking about mental and creating peer support in a world where it's for everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And because a lot more, I mean, there's a lot of people that are going through mental health challenges and they go to their private doctors and they're in community like everyone else. And we create this difference between the ones that we're trying to find the drop-in center and that community. And we're all really on the same, and we can all really appreciate more a culture where we can talk about our mental health for everybody, and we can
Mhm.
appreciate each other's differences. And yeah, having more of those spaces, but in both, certainly internalized stigma that Gina's talking about is real. It's real as regards to race and sexism, and right, and we see these disproportionate populations because of that. That internalized stigma started with externalized discrimination.
Yes.
And we need safe spaces because people are discriminated against based on roles that they're buying into and what they're believing other people's roles are. And so I do think that it's not just that we have to recognize that part of our mental health and emotional health in the community has to do with the health of the community.
yes.
And that's where education comes in. That's where advocacy and shared stories and recognizing that humans go through challenges and many of those affect emotions can broaden access, Matthew, that you're talking about, is because maybe we find it deep inside to share a story that can educate a community so that better access can occur. So I think, Matthew, it starts with education. I believe way back when I first started working for the Mental Health Association, part of my job was to educate the larger community. It was to educate the mental health system, but also the larger community. So I think, Matthew, that's where your education comes in, is how do we create healthy communities, and how do we, those of us that have been through difficult times, how do we be part of that movement to create healthier communities?
Some of my most amazing peer support times have occurred at the bus stop while I was there with a mother, and I was there with my kids waiting for the bus to come, and the bus left, and we started talking,
Yes.
and we started talking openly, not about roles and labels, but about feelings and thoughts and challenges. And sometimes it came up because people said, "What do you do for a living?" And I, talked in generalities about what I did, and they said, "Oh, really?" And they had questions, and then I would say, "Well, I come from my own inside out. Like, I know what I know because mostly I experienced it." And then all of a sudden, it was like, "Oh, yeah, me too." And that's what it looks like in the community. And it also looks like when there's a local festival at the community park, that we're there too, and we're talking about wellness, and we have a table, and we're there with our kids, and we go, and not over here at this center, right?
It's like what we've done, like in the last 20 years with recovery, we're working with people who have been over medicated, hospitalized, or in some way institutionalized for a long time. So when we conceived the whole idea of recovery, we're responding to that, people of that vintage. And I think what you guys are saying is that that group of people has kind of gone through the train station now. And the new folks that are coming along, maybe we do recovery differently. Maybe their needs are different there because they've had a different experience. Many have not been in a state hospital. They've just been out getting hurt in the community one way or the other.
Mhm.
So I think it challenges us, as you guys are saying, to really look at the way we try to help. So I'd love to keep talking. You guys are wonderful, but I know you have to go. So I will not hold you against your will.
Thank you.
Well, Lori, thank you for you just letting this evolve into a little mini community, letting the three of us do this collaboratively, because I think that speaks to the way the way all three of us like to do things together. But
I think we should do this again in a few months. Let this settle and then come back together and see what we're thinking in a few months. I mean, today, with everything that's going on, who knows where we'll be in a couple months? Up in the air.
Yeah.
absolutely.
So thank you all very much. I don't want to let you go. I just love all three of you so much, but I will keep my word and release you. Release you to the community.
Awesome.
So thanks so much. And I'll let you know when we publish this. Well, I just know you found that interesting because just listening to it, listening to these folks, I get inspired every time I hear Matt. And, to have Gina and Ray with him this time have added so much and so much breadth to the whole thing. So thank you for joining us. So glad you could make it. And see you next time. Yeah. Any questions, comments, concerns, feel free to reach out to us. We're happy to be in conversation with you. Okay. So long for now.